Hello, my friends out there in the real world. Nick Zigich with the Real Estate Junkies, and today we're going to be talking about more insurance. But on this time, I want you to recognize yourself. If you are an investor and own places where there are tenants, or if you're a tenant in a place that's owned by another investor, this is the show for you. With me today in the studio, Mark Wu. Mark is an insurance agent owner, and he has been around for a long time. So Mark is going to help us with something that we all need to know. I'm the landlord, you're the tenant, or vice versa. What do we need to have, Mark?
Well, Nick, as an owner of the investment property, 1 to 4 units, you want to ensure that you have many aspects, but primarily you want to make sure that you have coverage in case the place burns down, that the structure can be rebuilt.
Yep, absolutely.
The other aspect you want to make sure that as an owner, and it's really essential, is that there's liability coverage on the policy, so that if your tenants happen to slip and falls on the premises, or if their guests get injured on the premises, that you have adequate liability protection, so that if they happen to come after you as a landlord,
Absolutely.
you are covered for that.
And Mark, we mentioned it before, liability being we're going to talk about other parts of it, but liability being the key for anybody missing any of our shows on liability policies. Just run quickly on how a small thing can become a big problem.
Certainly. Well, liability is something that in our industry explodes. And so as an agent for 25 years, we often recommend put in a liability claim when it happens, because a small issue can turn on to a big issue if the person that's injured happens to get an attorney involved, or they incur serious injuries, or they don't have serious injuries, but they want to come after you anyways. You know, the litigation costs can be tens of thousands of dollars.
Absolutely.
So liability is something that will help in providing protection for that.
Sure. Before we move on to the property one, I wanted to exhort this liability one. I do a lot of business with investors. I do it both on residential and more on the commercial side. And what's very key is that both parties do carry liability insurance, right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
For instance, as a tenant, you would want to make sure that you also have renter's insurance, which also contains liability insurance in that.
Absolutely.
So that in the event that your dog bites somebody, you know, your insurance would afford protection, and it doesn't fall back on the landowner.
But the landlord needs to carry that insurance.
Absolutely.
As well.
It is a must. It
It's
is a must in the industry.
Exactly. So now when we're looking at the different angles, you got like, I like to talk from the point of stories. So for example, I own a investment property, and for whatever reason, it burns down. How am I protected? Do I have income protection with the insurance policy, and how does that work?
Yeah. If you have a landlord's policy, and make sure you have this conversation with your agent, make sure that it has loss of rents. So for instance, if the property burns down and you were getting $2,000 a month and it takes you 8 months to rebuild, your policy, if you have loss of rents, will oftentimes reimburse you for that loss of income that you are not getting because your tenant is no longer living in the house.
Sure. Now when you said most of the time, what should I be looking for?
Well, that you have the right coverage, because if you don't have the coverage, then it will not cover you for that if you don't have that endorsement on your policy.
Okay, so I should be looking for endorsement in case that I am deprived of receiving rent.
In the event of a covered peril. Yes, a loss
Okay.
of a covered peril.
Great. So now the other scenario would be that due to some small mishap, a portion of my property or something within the apartment burns down by tenant neglect, cigarette, carpet,
Right.
whatever. How is that covered?
Well, that's why you want to emphasize as a landowner that your tenants get renter's insurance, because if
Okay.
your tenant has renter's insurance, and for instance they're smoking outside on the porch and they accidentally cause $10,000 of fire or smoke damage to the porch, if they had renter's insurance, their liability would pay for that damage to you. And then the landlord, you as a landlord, won't have to put that claim on your own policy. And therefore, as you know from our previous episodes, claim frequency is something you want to stay away from as a property owner.
What are the best ways to just address this and sleep well?
Well, the best way to just address the situation is to speak to an insurance professional that you have confidence in. Okay. One that's been in the industry for a while, one that has E&O, one that knows the coverage and can explain it in simplistic terms so that a homeowner can understand, and ensure that not only there's enough dollars on the dwelling coverage to rebuild the structure back to its original condition, but to also make sure that it includes enough liability so that in the event that the property owner is exposed to a liability suit, that they are covered, as well as covering them for loss of rents or income.
And that's a separate peril.
That's a separate endorsement in a policy.
Good. So those three should cover.
Yes.
Now let's go back to the tenant side. The tenant should definitely carry that. In your personal experience, how many tenants do carry it, or is it like mandatory? Do they have to provide proof of insurance?
It is not mandatory, and unfortunately in our experience, very few tenants cover it. But these rental policies are $10, $15 a month. Okay. They're very inexpensive, but they not only provide some protection for the landowner, they also provide protection for the tenant themselves. Of course. Because if that same fire happened, the personal belongings of the tenant is covered up to the policy limits in the event of fire, as well as if it's something that is on, where they can't stay in the house for a month or two, but they love the house, and the renter policy will place them up someplace else while that house is being reconstructed and rebuilt. And so the tenant can go on being a future tenant for you. And if there is also liability issues created where, hey, maybe their kids left a skateboard out on the sidewalk and somebody slipped and fell because of their negligence of leaving it out, they're going to be afforded coverage. So these are valuable aspects of a policy that each tenant should and have in our community.
Absolutely. I read your brochure just before we got together, and it was a nice brochure that explains in real simple terms on the benefits of these different things. So I did like the theft, that there was theft over there. Right. And so they're covered pretty much if somebody breaks in.
That is right, excluding their deductible and again, according to the policy jackets and what is not covered. Right. Many of the contents within the policy limits are going to be covered in the event of theft.
Yeah, and would you encourage the landlords to actually, when leasing out, when renting out a property, to provide some kind of material to the tenants to encourage the insurance policy?
Our practice in our agency and our recommendation to all investors is to always present and offer that the tenants buy renter's insurance, because it's not only good for themselves, but it's also good for their tenants as well.
Mark, thanks. I think we nailed this down. We got everything covered.
We certainly did, Nick, and I'm glad to be a part of the show.
Thank you for being here. If you're a tenant and you watch this show, do those things. Get an insurance policy. If you're a landlord, help your tenant get a policy and have one yourself. If you need to see this over, rewind and watch it again because it's good. I'm Nick Zigich, and until next time, I'll see you on the Real Estate Junkies.